Mercedes are not dominating Barcelona because they found one part nobody else noticed. They are dominating because they may have built a trick that no rival can copy without rebuilding the entire car around it. The engine changes when it gets hot. The front wing may move in a way that satisfies the rule before the real benefit is complete. The car protects its tires, carries speed, and gives Antonelli the confidence Russell is still searching for in the same garage. And that is the nightmare for Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. Because you can copy a wing shape. You can copy an idea. But you cannot copy months of hidden understanding during one Spanish Grand Prix weekend. If Mercedes are right, the championship is already slipping away. If the rivals are right, this could become the most dangerous loophole of the season. Subscribe to the channel. Barcelona is the worst possible place to bring a trick that only works in theory. Because this circuit does not flatter weak ideas. It does not protect a car that is fast for one lap but fragile over a race distance. It does not allow a team to hide behind luck, traffic, or a clever strategy call for very long. Barcelona keeps asking the same question, corner after corner, lap after lap. Is this car truly complete? And that is exactly why Mercedes have become such a problem for everyone else. The speed they are showing is not just coming from one obvious place. If it were, rival teams would already know where to attack. If Mercedes were only fast on the straights, Ferrari could trim downforce. If they were only strong in the corners, Red Bull could chase balance. If they were only protecting tires, McLaren could shift strategy. That kind of advantage is painful, but it is understandable. This one feels different. Mercedes look dangerous because their performance seems connected. The power unit, the front wing, the active aero timing, the tire behavior, and the driver confidence all appear to be feeding each other. One advantage creates the next. One small gain opens the door to another. And by the time the lap is finished, no rival team can point to one single corner and say, that is where we are losing everything. That is the nightmare. Because when you lose in one clear place, you can fix one clear thing. When you lose a little everywhere, you start questioning the whole car. Barcelona magnifies that fear. The long corners punish sliding. The straights punish drag. The braking zones punish instability. The abrasive surface punishes tire abuse. A car that is only fast in a narrow condition will eventually show weakness here. It will overheat the tires. It will lose balance as fuel burns away. It will force the driver to make corrections. And those corrections become lap time bleeding away in public. But the Mercedes W17 does not seem to be bleeding in the same way. That is why rivals are not just studying the car. They are studying the behavior of the car. There is a difference. Studying the car means looking at what parts are bolted onto it. The nose. The wing. The floor, the rear bodywork, the cooling, every visible piece. Studying the behavior means asking what the car does after the obvious part of the story is over. What happens when it gets hot? What happens when the active aero changes mode? What happens when the front wing reaches the first legal position? What happens after that? What happens to the ride height when speed increases? What happens to the tires after 10 laps instead of 1? That is where Mercedes may have found the real advantage. Not in what the car looks like. In what the car becomes. And this is the reason no team can copy it during the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. A rival can copy a shape. It can photograph a wing. It can measure a bodywork line. It can bring a new package to a later race. But it cannot instantly copy months of understanding about how a car behaves under heat, load, speed, and pressure. It cannot suddenly rebuild the relationship between the power unit and the aero platform. It cannot magically create the same confidence in the driver. That kind of advantage is not added. It is grown. Mercedes may have grown it from the very beginning of the new regulations. The 2026 rules changed the sport in a way that made old habits less useful. The power units became more dependent on the balance between combustion and electrical deployment. Active aerodynamics became mandatory. Cars had to shift between lower drag and higher grip more intelligently than ever. The driver was no longer just managing tires and braking points. He was managing a machine that changed its personality through the lap. That is why the Mercedes trick is so hard to copy. It lives in the connection between systems. The engine gives one kind of advantage. The wing gives another. The timing of the wing movement can change how stable the car feels. The stability of the car changes how much the tires slide. The tire temperature changes how long the driver can push. The driver's confidence changes how early he commits. And that commitment changes the entire lap. It is a chain. Break one link, and maybe Mercedes lose something. But copy one link, and rivals still do not have the chain. That is the part Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren cannot solve instantly. They may know the direction. They may suspect the idea. They may even understand the broad principle. But Formula One is not won by broad principles. It is won by execution so precise that a few milliseconds, a few degrees of heat, or a tiny movement of carbon fiber can become the difference between controlling a race and chasing one. And at Barcelona, Mercedes appear to be controlling the conditions that matter most. The engine controversy explains the first part of the fear. Rival manufacturers were concerned that Mercedes may have used materials that behave differently once the power unit reaches operating temperature. In simple terms, the engine could pass one kind of check when cold, then produce more effective performance when hot. If that advantage exists, it cannot be copied from the outside. Because rivals cannot see the inside of the engine under racing heat. They cannot photograph thermal expansion. They cannot watch a compression ratio changing at full operating temperature. They cannot know the exact materials, tolerances, or calibration choices Mercedes used. They can complain. They can ask questions. They can push the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to measure more carefully. But they cannot copy it overnight. That is what makes it powerful. Then comes the front wing. Reports suggested the Mercedes front wing may have been doing something subtle with its active aero transition. The allegation was that it could move enough within 400 milliseconds to satisfy the requirement, then continue toward its final state over a longer window. Again, the theme is the same. The car meets the visible moment, then gains in the real moment. And if that is true, copying it is not as simple as making a wing move more slowly or more cleverly. The entire aerodynamic map has to support it. The floor has to accept the airflow. The rear of the car has to stay balanced. The tires have to survive the load. The driver has to trust the transition. The system has to be legal enough, reliable enough, and repeatable enough to use in a race. That is not a trick you steal in one weekend. That is a philosophy. And this is why Barcelona is so dangerous for Mercedes rivals. They are not only trying to beat lap time. They are trying to understand a moving target. A car that may be different when cold than when hot. Different at the first moment of aero movement than at the final moment. Different in Antonelli's hands than in Russell's. That last part matters more than people realize. Because if even Russell is struggling to make the same Mercedes feel natural, then the trick is clearly not easy. Russell is not an outsider. He has the same badge on his overalls. He sits in the same garage. He has access to the same team, the same meetings, the same engineers, and the same data structure. Yet he has admitted that nothing is clicking, and that his driving style is not working with the car. That tells the rest of the grid something frightening. The Mercedes advantage may not be fully copyable even inside Mercedes. Antonelli seems to have the style that unlocks it. Russell is still searching for it. And if the teammate cannot simply copy the feeling, what chance does a rival team have from across the pit lane? This is where the story turns from technical to psychological. A copyable advantage gives rivals hope. They can study it, build it, test it, and eventually arrive with their own version. But an advantage tied to a driver's confidence is different. You can copy carbon fiber. You can copy a concept. You can copy a layout. You cannot copy trust. Antonelli appears to trust the car in the exact moments where Barcelona demands commitment. He can let the front end bite. He can let the aero transition happen. He can protect the tires without looking slow. He can use the power without turning the lap into a fight. That turns the Mercedes concept into something sharper than a design. It becomes a partnership. And that is why the rest of the grid is trapped. If they copy the wing, they still need the floor. If they copy the floor, they still need the suspension behavior. If they copy the suspension idea, they still need the engine operating window. If they copy the engine philosophy, they still need the driver who can keep everything alive without overdriving it. By the time they chase one answer, Mercedes may already be benefiting from 5 others. That is how domination becomes difficult to stop. Not with one massive secret. With a system that makes every rival reaction feel late. The reason Mercedes are so difficult to copy is not only technical. It is structural. Every rival team at Barcelona is trying to solve a puzzle from the outside. They can see the lap time. They can hear the rumors. They can study the speed traps, the corner traces, and the way the Mercedes behaves through the most demanding parts of the circuit. But they are still looking at the final result of decisions that were made months earlier. That is the cruel part. By the time a Formula One car arrives at a Grand Prix, it is already a history book made of carbon fiber. Every surface has a reason. Every cooling opening tells a story. Every suspension angle is connected to a decision made long before the cars were unpacked in the garage. So when Mercedes arrive with a trick that appears to involve engine behavior, active aero timing, and the confidence of a driver like Antonelli, rivals cannot just copy the last visible piece and expect the same result. They would be copying the final sentence without knowing the language. That is why Ferrari's situation is so complicated. Ferrari can see the threat. They understand that Mercedes are not simply fast because of raw power or a clean front wing. They know the Mercedes' advantage may come from how the entire car works together once it is hot, loaded, and moving through the lap. Ferrari can protest. They can pressure the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. They can bring upgrades. They can chase their own balance. But they cannot make their car become a Mercedes overnight. Their car was born from a different concept. A different aerodynamic map. A different power unit philosophy. A different idea of how to use the new regulations. And once those choices are built into the chassis, the floor, the cooling, the suspension, and the way the driver feels the car, changing direction becomes painful. This is where Formula One becomes brutal. A team can understand the correct answer after the exam has already started. That does not mean it can rewrite every page in time. And Barcelona makes that weakness obvious. If Mercedes are gaining on the straights because the power unit is working in a stronger thermal condition, rivals cannot simply turn up their engines without risking reliability, energy deployment problems, or tire stress from a different setup compromise. If Mercedes are gaining through a more subtle front wing transition, rivals cannot simply copy the movement without knowing how it affects the floor, the rear balance, and the tire temperature over a full stint. Everything costs something. That is the rule. More speed on the straight can cost grip in the corner. More downforce can cost drag. More aggressive balance can destroy the tires. More power can create heat. More stability can make the car lazy. Every team is making trades all the time. The fear is that Mercedes found a way to reduce the cost of those trades. Not remove them completely. That never happens. But reduce them enough that rivals are always choosing between two painful options, while Mercedes seem to get both sides of the deal. That is domination. Not just being faster. Having fewer compromises. And when a car has fewer compromises, the driver begins to look untouchable. He is not forced to choose between attack and survival as often. He can push without destroying the tires immediately. He can carry speed without fighting the balance. He can defend without burning too much energy. He can stay calm because the car is not constantly asking him to pay for every gain. That is what rivals are really seeing at Barcelona. They are not only seeing a faster Mercedes. They are seeing a Mercedes that looks less punished by the normal rules of compromise. And that is incredibly hard to copy. Red Bull know this better than anyone. They built an era of dominance by understanding how one aerodynamic philosophy could make every other team chase shadows. When a concept is deeply integrated, rivals can copy the surface and still miss the soul. They can bring a similar shape and get none of the same stability. They can imitate the idea and find that their car reacts completely differently. Now Red Bull are on the other side of that equation. They can see Mercedes doing something powerful, but seeing is not the same as owning. McLaren face a different problem. As a Mercedes customer team, they are close enough to feel the sting, but not close enough to fully access the secret. The source material suggests that customer teams, including McLaren and Williams, were uneasy about the level of technical assistance and data sharing from Mercedes. That matters because it tells you how protected the works team advantage may be. If a team using Mercedes power still does not feel it has the full picture, then the rest of the paddock has even less. That is the power of being the works team. You do not just have the engine. You have the full integration. You know the calibration choices. You know how the power unit works with the cooling package, the bodywork, the aero philosophy, the suspension, and the race strategy. The customer may receive an excellent product, but the works team owns the deepest understanding of how to place that product inside a complete car. That is another reason copying Mercedes is so difficult. The trick may not be sitting in the part itself. It may be sitting in the instructions Mercedes never have to share. And then there is Williams, facing the same uncomfortable reality from another angle. James Vowles knows Mercedes deeply. He understands how powerful that organization can be when it finds a direction. But knowing the culture does not mean having access to every answer. A customer team can suspect what is happening and still be unable to reproduce it because the missing piece is not visible.